Today I want to talk about 10 mistakes that I've seen quite often in wildlife photography when I was teaching photography workshops, or that also happened to me in the past, and to be honest, some of them are still happening to me now. They are of different nature. Some are more technical, some are more in terms of image composition or what you actually take with you, how you behave in the field. And it's sometimes some subtle changes that can really make a difference, that can maybe mean that the shot will look much nicer or lead to the fact that you actually can take the shot where otherwise you would have missed it. And in some extreme cases it can even lead to damaging your gear. So keep watching if you want to avoid this in the future. The first mistake might seem quite basic, but I still see it happening quite often, and that is that people don't use the lens hood that is provided with many lenses. And I would recommend for 99% of the time, just use this lens hood. First of all, if you have it in this reverse position, depending on your lens, it's very hard to actually reach the zoom or the focus ring. Second, it's a very good protection against, for example, if you're out in the forest and you walk through, let's say, some thicker bushes, it's a good protection against having scratches on the glass. It can improve your image quality in some situations, and I've actually seen people taking pictures on a rainy day without the lens hood, and this just massively increases your risk of having water drops on the front element of the lens, which often you will see in the actual image. So I highly recommend just using the lens hood in basically all the situations. There's just a very few selected cases where I don't use it. This is, for example, if I'm in a height that is rather small and I don't have much space, and the lens hood of my 600mm f4 is quite big, so then I might take it off. Another situation is if it's very windy and there is no rain or no dust flying around, I might also take it off because the wind actually gets caught in the lens hood and it makes it harder to handhold the image. But these are really the exceptions. Tip number 2 is also about protecting your gear, but this time more about the camera, and it's about how you do the lens change. So I've seen very wild and different versions of how to change your lens on the camera. What I would absolutely avoid to do is basically taking off your camera and then leaving it laying around like this, because dust will just fall in, especially if you're out in the field. At home it's a bit less risky, but especially outside. So generally I prefer to put both of my lenses next to me and then pre-loosen the lens cap on the other lens, and then basically I lose the camera and I move the camera from one lens to the other. I fix it, then I take the lens cap, put it on the other lens again, and it's done. And this is especially important if you need to change the lens in situations that are not ideal. For example, if it's raining, I would obviously try to get to a dry place, ideally under a roof of a house or something, but sometimes in nature this is not possible. So then I go below a big rock where I know that there is no rain. If I have an umbrella with me, I just put the umbrella over my on the ground somewhere over my backpack, and I try to change the lenses there. I just want to avoid that dust, dirt or rain is entering the camera or the lens. Another tip that I have is, if your camera supports it, I would encourage you to use this sensor shield. For Nikon cameras, they have a dedicated sensor shield. The Sony and Canon cameras that I know just use the mechanical shutter. But the point is that you can see here, we don't see the actual sensor. This is the mechanical shutter. Obviously be careful, you should not touch that, but it has the advantage that the sensor is a bit more protected. So I would use this whenever possible. Mistake number 3 is something that luckily often goes without consequences, but if you have the consequences, they are really tough. And this is not doing a backup. So all the hard drives, solid state drives, your internal drive on the computer, at some point it will fail. It's a question of when and not if. And I would just be prepared and do regular backups. Ideally also do one backup offsite, meaning outside of your house, ideally outside of town. I have one at my parents' place. Another option is to have one in the office, wherever, just that it's physically like separate in case that your house catches fire, maybe your neighbor upstairs forgets to turn up the bathtub and you have a water problem, maybe some thieves come and break in, whatever. I get it that in this situation probably your photos are not the biggest concern, but it's quite cheap to avoid at least losing your photos actually by just buying another hard drive. It can be a rather cheap external spinning drive that you can get 4 terabytes for like $100. I linked one model below. Just every 2 or 3 months at least, copy the new data on there, and as I mentioned, put it to work, put it at your parents, at your siblings' place, wherever, and ideally do daily or weekly backups that you do on site. Mistake number 4 also evolves around kind of saving money at the wrong point or at the wrong place. And this time it's about memory cards. So first of all, I prefer to buy from more known brands. And the second thing is the speed. So I have seen some people that use a more professional body like an R5 or Z8, A1, and then in the end use SD cards. And I think this is just a bit a waste, because often the CF Express cards are actually not more expensive than SD cards anymore, and they are so much faster when it comes to writing data onto the card. And this means that your buffer is bigger, you can capture more action scenes. The second thing is always have a spare card. Unfortunately, sometimes cards can fail, no matter if it's SD or CF Express cards. And if you're on a nice photography trip, it's nice if at least you can swap the card, put in a new one and continue shooting, and don't go look online first where the next electronic store is and miss taking pictures in this time. If your camera has 2 card slots, I also recommend to actually use both. How you use them depends a bit on the camera model. For example, on my R5 and R5 Mark II, I don't shoot redundantly because the SD would slow down everything. This would be a huge bottleneck. So I just have the SD as an overflow. So if my CF Express card ever gets full, I can just continue shooting on the SD card, even though the buffer is very limited then. I've also seen many people that don't really know how their camera works. And in my opinion, the camera is just a tool, and the tool is only as good as you are as a photographer using this tool. So you should be familiar with your camera. You should know where the buttons are, that if you're looking through the viewfinder, you can change the most important settings without needing to take your camera off and going in the menu and losing time and potentially the image. So just learn to use your camera, know where your buttons are, know how you can configure them. There is tons of great material on YouTube for various cameras model. You can read the manual, and maybe it's a good starting point, but sometimes I feel like the manual is not the language is often not the easiest to understand how something works, and maybe it helps you more to check online for some options. Tip number 6 is very similar, and this is that the camera has the wrong settings dialed in. And here I don't necessarily mean that people don't know what the good settings are, but it just happens that we change the settings for one specific scene. We put the camera in the backpack, we forget about it, and the next day we have a totally different scene and we need to readjust the settings. Of course, to a certain degree it's normal, but if you go a bit more crazy with your settings one day, just put them back to a more, let's say, standard value or something that you know is a good starting point for when you shoot next time. One example that I give to you, if I was taking pictures of red deer, it was getting dark, I was at 20,000 ISO, 1/30th of a second. On my original R5, maybe I used a different shutter mode, whatever. Next time I shoot, I will probably not use such high ISO anymore. So what I would do just when the action is over, when I want to go home, before I put the camera in the backpack, I just put the settings back to something a bit more standard. And next time I take the camera out, I take 30 seconds to 1 minute before I start taking pictures, just to see if the settings make sense for the current situation. A bonus tip here is basically to use these individual shooting modes like C1, C2, C3 or U1, U2, whatever, to save kind of different scenarios. So if you sometimes do landscape photography, sometimes wildlife, you can just put them on different camera settings, and then, or these individual shooting modes, And this gives you the advantage that there is no risk that you accidentally go out taking pictures of wildlife and you realize way too late that your autofocus was in one shot or AFS instead of servo or AFC because you were taking a landscape picture the day before. Mistake number 7 is that I often see people, when they see a bird out in the field, they immediately take the camera and start shooting, which is completely understandable, and in some situations it's also good to take some shots. But if the bird stays there for a bit longer, or maybe it's coming back to the same position more or less regularly, basically just take a step back, so to speak, and think about if there is a better position for yourself, maybe a lower angle, a higher angle, going a bit more to the left or to the right. Sometimes this can have a dramatic influence of how the background looks, and how the background and foreground looks is really determining to a large extent, in my opinion, how the final image will look like. If you want some inspiration on this topic, get some more ideas and watch out for common pitfalls, then check out my ebook, I linked it below. Mistake number 8 that I see sometimes is that people are not realizing, again, when taking pictures, that they actually own a zoom lens. And if a bigger bird is coming, they could often just zoom out a bit to basically accommodate to the whole bird in the picture and not cutting accidentally its tail or the feet or whatever. At the same time, if you have a smaller bird, it makes sense sometimes to zoom in a bit more. Of course, you could crop on the computer, but this usually degrades the image quality, and in general, if you zoom in more with the lens, the background gets smoother than if you zoom in digitally on the computer. So that's something to consider. And in many cameras, you can actually see the focal length that you have at the moment. So if I look through the viewfinder and I see I'm at 340 millimeters with my 100 to 500 millimeter lens, I know that I can still zoom in both directions. Another mistake that admittedly still happens quite a lot to me is that basically I leave the backpack somewhere and I try to stalk an animal or just go to the beach, lay down flat, and I start shooting and it works really great, and at some point my battery is empty and my spare battery is back at the backpack. Or I start using a tele-extender, the animal is coming closer, I remove the extender and I don't have the lens caps from the extender with me. So either I keep the tele-extender in or I just put it on a rock or something, which is semi-ideal, but it works. But if I'm on a beach, I don't want to just put the extender just in the sand. So what I recommend is always putting a spare battery, the extender or extender caps, and other things that you might think you could need during the shooting. Just take it with you. It's really worth it. What I'm using lately a lot is this pouch from Naya Evo. It's a small pouch that you can just attach to your belt, and it's more or less waterproof, and it has enough space for, like, I usually have like a rocket blower, I have a microfiber cloth, I try to put at least one spare battery, and as I mentioned, either the tele-extender or the caps of the tele-extender in this one. Again, I need to be more careful that I always bring it, but that's a great way to avoid these situations where you lack something as essential as your battery. The final mistake that I see is that people are out in the wrong time of the day. So obviously, if you're shooting a species that is only active during certain periods of the day, this is very, very important. For example, if I want to take pictures of moose, at least in Europe, they tend to be more active during dusk or dawn. And if you go at 2 in the afternoon, your chances of seeing a moose are just very low. However, if you go at 10, 11 in the night, basically just before it gets dark, or in the morning, just when it's starting to get bright, you have much higher chances of observing them. If it's a sunny day and you're taking a picture of a bird species, maybe it does not matter so much, even though many birds still have their peak activity early in the morning. And I often see people arriving when I'm basically leaving, because for me the light is getting too harsh. It doesn't mean that you cannot take pictures in harsh lights. There are some great examples of what you can still do in harsh light. It can still look amazing, but it's different types of shots. And I think it's crucial that you are aware of what you can do in this more harsh light and what you can't do in this harsh light. So here my tip is just be aware of different weather conditions and what you can do in each condition. I hope the video was helpful for you guys, and please let me know if I forgot something, if you had something that you have experienced a lot in the past, some mistakes that you made or maybe still do. Just share it in the comments so everybody can learn.